Well, it has been a while.
Holy shit, it's been a while.
Yeah, way too long. But things on my end have been a bit crazy. So this break is entirely lays at my feet.
Well, I don't know. I mean, when was the last time we actually did it? 'Cause was it before Christmas?
I think it was. It was
Blimey.
before. It was before I started doing some night work.
Yeah, so it's been like 2 months.
Yeah, at least I think.
I mean, to be fair, you've been keeping up on the shorts game though. You've been keeping it alive.
Yeah,
I mean, full credit to you, Chris, since you're the one who ends up editing all these anyway. So, like, I can sit on my laurels and twiddle my thumbs all day.
Well, this is the thing. You bring the questions, so I can pump out a couple of shorts. To be fair, if you haven't watched the shorts, check out the shorts. I'm going to try and keep doing more, and I'll get Nick did some voices for some of the ones relating to kind of Lamentia and the stuff that he DM'd. But I want to kind of keep that going, just because I think it's really useful. Well, one for our players as a way of kind of recording information. But also just like if you're mildly interested in the podcast and you want to know what random thing we name drop.
That's true. It's just like the equivalent of in Dark Souls, you have like a named weapon and then being bothered to open up the wiki article to read about it.
Yeah. And I think I probably get us to a little bit as to where we're going to go with today. Before, we've mostly been kind of covering the story as the campaigns have unfolded. But I think we're going to take a little break in the spirit of the break we have just taken.
Yeah.
We're
talk stepping about back to look at the bigger picture.
Exactly. So I think today's episode is going to kind of focus on like the deities of the world / great forces, and maybe a little bit of the planes or cosmology.
Yeah, well, I thought we'd start small and we'd work our way up to the big. So I guess my first question, Chris, is we know the map. You've given us the map, and you're sort of filling in the missing details all the time. And especially as we explore it, we're getting more details. But what lies beyond the edge of the map?
Well, I think in the last kind of plan that I had is that it is in effect kind of a large wall. It is like
a flat Earth as well, right?
Well, when it comes to this, maybe.
But, in this world, yeah.
But I think it would be like either it is a barrier of some kind, whether that's a kind of mountain range that is kind of heavily kind of covered in fog and mist, a little bit like the kind of the barrier in Barovia in Curse of Strahd.
Yeah,
I imagine it as more like that.
So if one strayed too far, they would stray into the fog, and as space lost its sort of meaning, they wouldn't actually be able to go any further.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's not like other flat Earths where they would literally just fall off into space.
Yeah, it may be a situation where like they just kind of they cannot get any further, or things get more and more extreme, more wild, or they may simply just kind of come to nothingness. And yeah, a little bit. There's that. Is it?
It sounds kind of like it's a bit like, I know we've used Warhammer a lot to compare like the rules, but that's only because you guys and Seb like use a lot of Warhammer references all the time. Yeah. But from the way you describe it, it's sort of like physically entering the warp. So like suddenly things aren't certain, and you could end up in a random place, and the laws of physics no longer apply.
Yes, exactly. I think especially like if you get to a barrier, like there's a scene in I don't know if it's this could sound really weird, but I don't know if it's the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, or if it's in the Pirates of the Caribbean. But it's a scene where you effectively it's either Jack Sparrow or someone meeting Aslan. Again, completely unsure where this is, like which of the two it's from, but it is like a flat beach where it's like crystal, completely still water.
I think that's Pirates of the Caribbean, because they arrive on the beach and it's just an endless ocean, and the land is just an endless desert.
Exactly, and I guess it would be like that, but it'd be like mountains too physically tall to scale, or a mist so thick no light can penetrate it, or
It's like video game logic where the tall mountains are in the distance, but because they're only background rendered, you can't actually get to them. As you walk
exactly,
along, they get further away.
exactly, and eventually, these paywalls may come down, but yeah, no, I like the idea of it being, at least having a boundary, whether
Mm.
that be a kind of like material boundary or a boundary that is kind of like esoteric in nature and just kind of breaks the rules of things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, are there people living that far out? As in the sort of the
Mm.
wall at the end of the world?
Yeah, I think there definitely would be. And the people that are living there, if we like, maybe not as common to be like people, but those people that would be there are like more wild, and more in touch with the kind of the very fabric of like the idea of magic in my world, like the weave.
So they'd
Um,
be like really strong and instinctual Penya here, like natural born sorcerers.
yeah, exactly, and
Mm.
it would be very rare for any one of them to like kind of travel deeper into the kind of the remaining kind of dish that is the rest of the world.
Right. So
Um,
I'm just thinking now because that might tie in well with Yulume Cal. Like
mm,
any sort of strong arcane natural born sorcerer, those her bloodline and the bloodline of maybe like Larina or Krem,
mm.
other people who were born with their abilities, sort of, or even Thexan, might stem from bloodlines of peoples who once lived at the edge of the world.
Yeah, I think that probably is um, kind of how they began. I also think that maybe this is kind of going a bit too big for the moment, but much in the same way that kind of Tolkien has some gods that like create different races.
Yeah,
Um, in that same way, I imagine that like other than the dwarfs, which were kind of
they were just
created
there.
by yeah, they were there. They were created by this kind of the god of the earth or the god of
What?
um,
So that
yeah,
brings in a really interesting question. If these people originated from the edge of the world, did
mm,
they come from beyond the barrier? Like, because if we think
yeah,
about the barrier as
mhm,
conception, like that's the
yeah,
idea of reality being runny, like
exactly,
where a dream can become real. So
yeah,
the mortal races coming in as a sort of a
it,
potential, something unobserved, but the potential for a race, and then passing the barrier, suddenly coming into contact with real
it,
physical, observable
exactly,
physics,
and
becoming real.
at least in my head, that's how maybe the gods created these mortal races, and
Because
kind of
we had like a very heated
pushed them into
debate
the world.
about this, where I was trying to wrap my head around the quantum nature of the gods. But I think I've got it now. So it's
Yeah,
like along with this barrier, this realm where like possibility, sort of because things that are possible beyond that barrier happen simultaneously with things that aren't possible. The gods exist,
mm,
even though they are creatures that sort of are born of sentience. They exist whether the mortals were there or not, because the mortals also possibly existed within that sort of void, but they only
yeah,
really exist when they leave it, when they enter
exactly.
into the real space.
Exactly, and I think that's kind of
Fascinating.
yeah how at least the origin of most mortal races appear, other than the dwarfs, of course,
I mean,
because the
of course,
dwarfs
the
are always
dwarves are the only real race. I mean, like that. I think that makes sense though. They're like you know how in a lot of stories, iron is like
there.
a
Mm,
sort of a special material because it's the most stable.
yeah,
So it resists teleportation and like it can disrupt powers from other planes.
mm,
Um, I suppose like the dwarf is like the mortal equivalent of iron. Like they are a
yeah,
stable people. They were born in reality.
mm, yeah, and I think that's probably what also kind of comes to play with the characteristics of typical dwarfs, at least those
Yeah.
that are common, in that they're very like stalwart,
Yeah.
very kind of have strong beliefs in themselves. Alternatively, hold grudges for a long period of time.
Yeah, yeah. I guess that's
Yeah,
sort of because they don't have a lot of like potential different choices. They only have one, which is they have chosen what they wanted to do and they'll stick with it.
yeah, exactly. Um, and yeah, I think that's at least the way that the most in my head that the way that the outer barrier is, and then also kind of the kind of creation myth of a lot of these mortal races.
That is cool.
Yeah,
So I suppose it would be sort of concurrent with leaving the Garden of Eden. That sort of
yeah.
a.
I do think there are some other races. In particular, I think there's three, like including dwarfs,
Yeah.
that were in the world before. And for me, those would be like the dwarfs, the dragons, and the giants.
Dwarves,
Um,
dragons, and giants.
yeah. Um, and then everything else has kind of been created and kind of like put through or drip fed into the world. Whereas
Oh.
the dwarves were probably in the ground from the beginning. In a similar way, dragon eggs were probably like clusters of gems in living stone. And then giants as well were probably like living stone shaped into
Oh
something.
my goodness! Of course. So living stone. Because we explored, like, I brought in Livingstone very briefly in the one shot, but that like would
Yeah.
explain a lot about why we don't see giants.
Yeah.
Because like the Livingstone is such a useful material, giants being hunted into extinction for
Mm.
the material that they are made of.
Yeah. I think that's probably where like giants began. Again, in my head as well, like I feel like they, much like the dwarves, there are a finite number of giants. But
So
the way that
I
no,
was just going
please.
to sort of ask, like, in that way, are giants and dragons like akin to elementals? Like they were part of the elements that sort of were born and took
Mm,
on more fleshy sort of traits
yeah,
as
yeah, I
time went
think so.
on.
I think so, definitely. Again, in my world, dragons kind of reproduce in a similar way that like they do in D&D. Just because I like the idea of dragon eggs and having the
Oh,
lineage of dragons. Um,
yeah.
yeah,
Well, over time, they would change. So
but
in the beginning, you like starting as like jewels or precious
mm,
gemstones in the earth, and
yeah,
then over time, like gaining their own sort of dragon eggs.
exactly. And I think there would be a difference between kind of like a cluster of gems or like a yeah, like a
That
cluster of gems or versus
oh
like
my
a
god,
cluster of ore.
that explains why they have such a love of treasure and wanting to hoard and sit on
Hmm.
it. It's a nesting instinct. Because
Yeah,
if their sort of eggs originally look like gems, that old instinct to protect their young. Wow.
yeah,
So something that is like intrinsically we always thought of like evil and greed and selfishness, like has a
mm,
root in like a really pure.
yeah. And I think also in that sense as well, these, at least in my head, in the living stone that first created before kind of like dwarves came out of it and giants were
Yeah.
formed from it. At least with like the metallic, chromatic, and gem dragons, they would have been covered in clusters of different things in this living stone. So like a sapphire gem dragon, which we know that exists in the world, their eggs originally, the ones that first hatched, would have been covered in clusters of sapphires. And like you say, it's like kind of like a nesting urge. In the same way, I would imagine that dragons would have a deep rooted desire of all treasure, but on top of that, a particular appreciation for one that mirrors their own kind of nature. So,
Yeah,
like
and the other races would see it as like, oh, vanity. Oh, they like sapphires because the dragon is made of sapphire, and it's, oh, aren't I beautiful? But in reality,
mm,
it's much deeper than that.
exactly, yeah.
That's pretty cool. So in that way, if we wanted to talk about like giants then, so
Mm,
giants coming from living stone. I know that there's like that sort of in Norse mythology, there's the giant I can't remember which one at the start of time who gets killed and as his blood sort of spills forth and creates the world
mm,
and outspew the dwarves, the Duergar.
yeah. I think that would. I don't. I think that probably would be at
Like I'm
least how
seeing
the.
similarities because if the dwarves hold living stone so precious and like
Mm,
they are born in the earth and we don't know why, and sort of that's sort of I imagine how the giants came to be in the beginning. It was essentially just a mountain that fucking got up and walked.
mhm. Yeah, exactly, and in the same way, like they probably, or at least the way that I imagine the dwarves, a finite number of dwarves came to be in the world, is
Yeah.
that before there was kind of great oceans, that there was great oceans, but there was mostly just like living stone and
Hmm.
great seas, and there was dragons that were hatching from the living stone and giants that were kind of popping out of these rock clusters, and it was kind of the battle that took place. That spread blood around it, and that's like a finite number of the dwarves are effectively small droplets of blood taken form that are trapped in this living stone.
So they are essentially you wouldn't really be able to call it reincarnations of those ancient races, would you?
Yeah,
More like
yeah, more like the progeny. Um,
hmm.
but
I
they are.
suppose that's why I compared it to the Durgar the giant. Like it's not
Mm,
quite a child, but it's sort of a race born out of the essence of a greater being as it
yeah,
was killed.
and I would also say that at least the giants that I'm imagining are not the giants we'd find in the modern setting. It
Hmm.
would be like a more ascended version of the giants.
Like
Uh,
more elemental,
yeah, exactly.
right? Because in D&D, it's like the storm giants that take on the elements, don't they? Because they're like
Yeah,
the most magical.
yeah.
And the weaker the giants get, the less magical they get until you get like fucking
Yeah,
ogres.
hill go. You get hill giants, which are just you know
Uh-huh.
portly fellows.
Big.
But yeah, I think that's at least how I would imagine those beings coming into existence.
Interesting. So
Um,
so in a way, the dwarves are the sort of mortal heirs to the world.
yes, yeah,
Fascinating. Especially fascinating, given that they are like a fairly minor species in terms of like the continent that we have explored so far.
well,
Like they're not exactly the most powerful race out there.
they are perhaps not the most powerful race, but they're definitely the least active. And I will say this though, because I have uh, at least I had the inspiration strike me like a week or so ago, and I have made the decision that I do want this to be the case. That in all these continents there is like another level, a little bit like the Underdark,
Mm.
but it is rather than being like an Underdark, a place of like kind of mushroom growth and like mycelium, like just like a kind of the more mushroom jungle aesthetic. It is more of a kind of uh, cavernous, like cave system where there are kind of some biomes in place, and I imagine there are still kind of like deep dwarven cities, and it's like almost like a mirror of what's above, but there are kind of like
Oh,
isolated dwarven settlements. So at
cool.
least in my head, there are definitely more dwarves on Restria for sure. Um, but
For
they just have
every
no
dwarf
interest.
you see on the surface, there's like 100 underneath.
Yeah, yeah, I wouldn't say they're like Tyranid levels of
They just swarm out the ground.
yeah.
The dwarves! The end of days!
Like
The
those
short tide has come.
they were natural sprinters. And your death shall be quick.
Once the
Ugh.
dwarves got in close, that was it. Very dangerous over short distances. Oh
But yeah,
man.
at least they're more prevalent that I've led the party, or at least the players, to believe, just because they don't have much interest in the kind of affairs of the
No.
overworld.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
But I suppose that would change. I mean, there are a few situations where I can see us accidentally getting down to these dwarf homes.
Mm.
Like, I mean, the obvious one is just a really fucking big hole in the ground.
Yep.
The second one being the ways, of course,
Yep.
which could take us anywhere.
Yeah.
And the third, like, would be going back to, oh God, what was the name of the dwarven settlement we got to? Um,
Nurcombe.
Nurkholm, that's right.
Yeah.
The other way would be going through a dwarven settlement, like
Mm.
Nurkholm. So, like, if the
Yeah.
dwarves had a certain problem that they needed a different hand in,
Yeah.
like, I suppose you'd need to like build up a pretty solid level of trust though to be
Yeah.
invited.
Exactly. I think probably the only mortal that I can think of off the top of my head, that has done that in recent years is Gronk. but Gronk, died too young to have that revealed to him.
I mean, let's think about the other far travelers that we've had so far. I mean, would Jonah, I could see potentially, but I think probably unlikely that he's actually gone down.
Yeah, I think Jonah spent quite a considerable time exploring all the parts of Restria.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Blum, I could see having. I mean, we did say he spent a lot of time just sort of sitting in the Druid Grove.
Yeah.
But he did like the dwarves.
Yeah, and I think Blum is the type of person the dwarves might trust to reveal a secret like this to them, largely because he is so insular and has no interest in anyone else.
Yeah.
And so he probably wouldn't tell anyone.
Well, I'm sure the dwarves have issues around, I imagine the dwarves probably. I don't know if you would know, but I don't know if you want to tell me if they themselves have druids, but they would have problems that would need a druid's hand, growing things down in the deep, and that's where that's where the deep roots of the ancient sort of groves reach. So that would be the best place to fight the rot.
Yeah, I think there would definitely be more kind of. There definitely are dwarven druids, and these kind of these pockets of steadings and groves that are kind of piercing through the overworld into the underworld. Yeah.
Nice. Damn, what a tangent! I feel like every episode we end up talking a little bit about dwarves.
They're just the best.
Yeah, they are the greatest race.
But I'll admit it. I'm just gonna say it because I still every time the Thorin dies in The Hobbit, I know it's not an amazing movie, but I still like shed a tear.
I mean, honestly, I like the book is I do the same.
The book is way better.
The book is well. Here's the thing: I don't actually know. It's been so long since I've read The Hobbit, and they're two very different experiences. As a child, I would definitely tell you that the movies were better because there's more to experience with the movies. Yeah. But then, as an adult, I might say the books are better because I have a more informed imagination. I'm able to imagine more than the movies can provide.
Yeah. Well, I'll just say it. I prefer the book to the movie, but
yeah, I do now.
I think the movie gets undue criticism. I think largely because the Lord of the Rings are so good. I think modern media has shown.
I don't know about that. I think some of the criticisms are pretty valid, like the fact that it was bloated. They added loads of stuff that was unnecessary.
Yeah. Legolas was not needed.
Yeah. Although I do agree that the Lord of the Rings set an impossibly high standard.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. Sorry. Tangent.
So going. I feel like that's a good segue actually. So the underworld is a plane in and of itself. It's like another world. Okay.
Yes.
And I want to extend that to the other planes beyond reality.
Yeah.
So starting with the planes that are closest to the real world, or at least
yes. So much similar to D&D, I think there would be the Shadowfell and the Feywild.
Are they? Yeah, but are they separate spaces? If you walked to the end of the world, could you walk through the barrier and then by chance find your way in that other world, as a separate space, or are they overlapped?
I think they're. No, I think it would be a separate space, but I don't think it would be. You'd be able to kind of, a little bit with the ways. I think you have to go through a portal to get there, or you have to have some kind of magical, teleportation spell or something like that would help you transport. Just because I think that I don't know. I don't want it to be connected, but what I do know is that the Feywild and the Shadowfell are connected in my world, at least. They form one and the same. It's almost like one part's the kind of the light side of the moon, the other one's the dark side of the moon.
It's just the Feywild is the spring. It's the sort of generator of life, and then the Shadowfell is the sort of the death side of the coin.
Yeah, it's exactly. I think it's rather like life death compared to seasonal.
Or
because
growth and decay, maybe.
yes, exactly. Whereas like the Feywild has almost rampant growth, the Shadowfell has just constant decay.
I suppose that would explain why the unseelie Fey is ugly. It's like a cancerous growth. Like it's
Yeah,
growth without restraint.
exactly. Yeah, I couldn't have put it better myself.
Cool. I like that a lot.
And then I think over like the kind of the Feywild slash Shadowfell ring, there is I think the elemental plane or planes.
Yeah.
But I feel like they exist mostly in kind of their own. I don't want to draw a map. It's more like there is past this kind of very magical world. There is kind of like a hazy border, a little bit like that on the edge of the material plane that leads into kind of the world of thoughts. There is this kind of you can very much end up in the elemental plane of air or the elemental plane of water by accident from the Feywild. Yeah.
Cool.
And then I mean, outside of that,
yeah,
yeah. I mean, outside of that, then you basically just have the astral plane.
So we've got we've got the planes that represent ideas and aspects of reality. We've got the Fey and the Fel,
Yeah,
which is like the growth and decay.
Yeah, but they're still
like,
material.
Yeah, like sort of thing and entropy, but like that's like entropy as like an idea.
Yeah.
As a plane.
Yes.
Or at least the Shadowfell is. I'm not
Yeah.
quite sure what the word would be for the Fae. Or like maybe like creation and entropy. Are there other planes that represent other sort of looser ideas about reality like those?
I don't think there would be. I think the other one would be just the larger astral plane.
Well, what about like order and chaos?
Again, order and chaos, I think, would come through in like clusters of thought. So I think each god has its own. Because I have a pantheon, of at least of the main gods, and in the astral plane, I think all gods exist as kind of like a cluster of thoughts and yeah, like elements that they kind of added to their retinue, or not the retinue, but like their attributes.
Yeah, I think we talked about this. We talked about this a little bit outside the podcast, where we compared them a bit to like the Chaos Gods in 40k. So like they themselves are made up of one core major idea, and then each of their small fragmented parts are sort of ideas that are similar but grow ever slightly less sort of connected to the original idea.
Yeah.
So everything that's sort of related can be attributed with the god and can sort of join with it.
Yeah.
But there are parts that get looser and looser.
Yeah, and I think in the kind of like the center of these kind of where the thoughts are still quite strong, the god would probably have created its own kind of maybe not court, but like realm that is semi-physical. That if it wishes to, it can bring mortals to kind of communicate with. And that's what you would kind of see as like the akin to like Mount Celestia or.
So this would be like the court of. If we were to compare this to like a sentient mind, because that's sort of what the realm of gods is. It's like one sentient mind.
Yeah.
We compare this sort of meeting point as the conscious or unconscious mind.
Ooh.
Because I'm thinking like, yeah, the realms of the gods split up and all together they make up one like full sentient like mortal mind. And that's like unconscious because they're all separate. They're all sort of as a collective, they're like unconscious because they don't work together actively.
Yeah, I think exactly. It's like they are unconscious.
But where they work together, i.e., in this middle sort of court, would that be the conscious? Like that would them coming together and becoming like a conscious thought, or would it be more like a sort of a dream where they can connect? like
Um,
subconsciously?
I think the kind of the point where they meet and it becomes more uh like a cluster of ideas is the kind of the astral plane around the kind of uh
Ah,
elemental planes, and then in the center, the material planes. It's almost as though like they have clusters of uh, similar ideas on the peripheries of the
mm.
astral plane, which
I'd
is
like to.
which is these gods.
I'd like to see that because I can imagine because beyond the real plane of reality, the
Yeah,
laws of like size no longer matter. So I
yeah,
can imagine an image where you've got the court of the gods,
mm.
the pantheon sitting around like, and in the middle there's a table, and it's just the real world sat in the middle,
Yeah,
like not a map, the real world just plopped there in the middle.
yeah. I think at least the way that I imagine these kind of domains to be is they would be like almost like galaxies of thought.
Mm.
Which, at the risk of sounding incredibly pretentious, is I guess the best way of putting it. It's like these kind of clusters of ideas that are similar, where
Yeah.
like at the center of it, it's very tight.
It's a
There's a lot
black
of
hole
kind of
sucking in.
math.
They're
Yeah,
actually eaters of all these emotions.
well, some of them maybe,
Obvious.
but at least in that way as well, there's probably like because I think it's probably a good idea at this point maybe to just mention that there is a kind of outlined pantheon of like the major deities, which are all mostly kind of either uh, they're not evil. None of these deities are evil per
Mm.
se, but there are definitely evil deities out there. So
Well, I mean,
they're
if there's a god to represent all different aspects of the mind, there have to be, surely.
exactly, and um, I think the reason why that I've pointed, I think that there's 12 that are kind of uh, not outright evil, but are like known as a major pantheon, are kind of good gods, good deities that
Mm.
are worshipped by most mortal races. But within that, there are like gods of destruction and uh,
Yeah.
gods of murder or gods of betrayal, or for instance, the Dark One was a god of lies and deceit,
Ah,
or
very
became one.
fitting.
Yeah. Um, and so I think that's how it would work. And in the same way, like where like, is there an like almost like Mechanus? Is there
Mm.
like a realm of order? There would be, but it's rather like more of a domain, like a physical world made up within this kind of
It's
astral thought.
the conception of order, like what order can be conceived to be.
Yeah, exactly. And it's almost like the kind of the thing with like Mount Olympus in the way that it's kind of now portrayed. It's like it's not really physical,
Yeah.
but it's like it's got like physical aspects so that you can visualize it. But
Mm.
yeah,
It's
it would
like
be like
the
that.
most real of all the non-real spaces.
Exactly.
It's like wanna be real.
Yeah, it's LARPing. It's LARPing being real.
LARPing is being real.
Uh, yeah, true words have never been spoken. That's all I can say. Um, and yeah, I think that's probably at least most of my thoughts on it. Do you have any questions about that?
Well, I was going to ask about some of the gods in particular.
Yes.
Um, so, you've got the pantheon. How many gods do you have in total?
12. I have 12
12.
gods in the pantheon, and
Is that
then
like 12 major gods and then like there are sort of smaller celestial
yeah,
entities? Right.
exactly. So for instance, we've got the god of the sun and healing, and like life is Heliod, or
Mm.
the Dawn Father.
Yeah.
Um, then there's the kind of the god of night, darkness, and dusk. Uh,
Now that actually brings up an important question. If the
mm,
edge of the world is a barrier, and I can imagine that that extends as a sort of almost like a sort of sphere,
yeah,
because yeah, if you kept flying up, which lots of people can do with magic with ease, like
mm,
you can't just go into space because there would be that non-realm there
yeah.
to stop you. So what's the sun? Because that can't be within the barrier, surely.
Mm.
So
So Yeah, I think the sun, at least in my world, will be like some kind of construct that has been created by
So the
Heliod.
sun is like a celestial clockwork.
Yes.
That is really cool.
I think it would probably be like a celestial clockwork in part working with the moon, because this actually gets onto something that has not really been discussed in the main campaign, but does pertain directly to one of the characters. And I hope he's okay with me maybe talking a little bit about it. But
Hang on, is this Kaikabad?
Yes, there is a connection between the Dawnfather and Atheros, who is the god of night and darkness, or as Keiko has referred to him, the Dusk Father. They're kind of they work almost to kind of safeguard the material plane and potentially prevent things coming in that shouldn't be allowed into this kind of experimentation ground. And I guess the moon and the sun.
Experimentation ground?
Well, I mean, to the gods, the creation of the material plane at least seems a little bit like an area where they've, at least experimented with ideas.
Yeah. Well, it's certainly a place where ideas can generate, because it's like a sanctuary for real mortality and real sentience and real minds.
Exactly.
So they can birth new ideas there.
Yeah.
And I guess that would sort of be like a god egg.
Yeah, I think so. And I guess the sun is a celestial construct, and the moon probably is also a celestial construct.
So what about the stars then? Because if the stars are so it's just like me trying to like fanboy my own conspiracy theory in here.
Yeah.
Like, would the stars be like visual interpretations of these greater ideas, of these greater sort of gods and other creatures that lie outside the plane that we can see?
Yes.
So
Exactly.
one day, if like a greater being outside the reality falls, the star just goes. Or like a falling star might be one traveling through the dead void.
Yeah, exactly. Or yeah, exactly. Like a falling
That must make
star.
navigating back through the stars like really hard. Like if the stars change.
Yeah, it is very difficult. Well, this is, I think, there's probably, in the same sense like there are these 12 major gods, there is probably a North Star equivalent in the world, and that would be like a minor deity. The
star
star
god.
is, yeah, it is just, or not even like a god of stars. It's just that specific star is a god, and
I mean, alternatively, it could be, you know how the brightest star in the night sky is like, it's actually Jupiter. It's not even a star. Like
yeah,
the brightest star in the sky in that world could be another plane that we can just about see. Like
another
because
egg
the Fae
beginning
is
to form.
closest. Like, oh, it's the Fae realm.
Yeah, or even another material plane slowly beginning to form, like a small nuclei.
Ooh.
But yeah,
Do I smell an isekai brewing?
oh, that would be crazy.
What terrible ideas.
It's this other egg isn't even just the rest of like our world. It's just Japan.
It's just the continent of Japan floating through the void of space.
Yeah, and so there's this kind of, there is the major gods are Heliod, the sun god, god of healing, Atheros, the god of night and darkness, Selene, the god of kind of moonlight illusion, and she's known as like the wife of Atheros, and she is the kind of moon to his darkness. There are like myths around it. There is,
so is she like the ex-wife of Heliod?
Almost certainly.
Oh, fantastic!
Yeah, and then you have the goddess of the sea, who is called Neridia. She is, at least in the way she's depicted, a little bit like a more humanoid version of Nami from League of Legends.
Yeah, well, I'd imagine it would be like someone with like the features of a fish, or watery kind of features.
Yeah, and then there is the god of like the sky and wind, Arius.
Yep.
That is controlled wind, so like not blusterous or stormy wind. There is the god of craftsmanship, art, and trade, which is Modius, typically depicted as a one-handed dwarf.
Interesting.
Then there is the god of death, known as Okator, or at least the god of the passage from life to death. And he's also kind of like the custodian of the underworld. Not the underworld being the world that is literally underneath, but the world of death.
Yeah. So, I mean, first of all, do people in this world have souls?
Yes.
So that would be like his whole domain.
Yeah, and I think, at least in my head, his whole domain would exist in the astral plane itself. And the reason why people have souls is because it is a kind of cluster of thoughts and ideas and potentials, their life that they have lived throughout time, that is effectively, it's not as strong as these gods, nowhere near as strong as these gods, but a person has an experience, they have experiences. And so their soul, once it is released from the material plane, will travel to the astral plane. And it's not like a great sun, but it's a small star. It's a tiny star. And in Okator's underworld or world of realm of death, there is kind of that is what he rules over. He's the custodian of these kind of these mortal beings that have passed.
So does Okator appear as like a guardian, or is he more like a traditional sort of like, I imagine people that fear him probably see him more of as a reaper, but how does he appear physically, like appearance wise, to a mortal soul?
Well, I'll pop up the image that I have that is of him. Bear in mind these are all kind of like humanoid.
I hope you know, just, but you know, before you post it, I am totally, I don't know why, but I'm just super in love with the idea of the pale man or skeleton in a cloak, like the classic, like the medieval classic look, or like cloaked man on a pale horse kind of death.
He looks more Greek.
Right.
But
so closer to like Hades.
Yeah, exactly.
Got it.
And that is kind of the idea that I've had for him. The other one is
smokes. Wow.
Yeah. I love in the
you there, king who has died. Take a tug on this.
Yeah, he just loves smoking fat ones.
He's not afraid of like, you know, any of this mortal worry. So he just has like the worst addictive vices.
Yeah,
takes drugs all day.
He's just canonically sponsored by Marlboro. And then there's the god of nature and the wilds, known as Eriu, typically depicted as kind of like the Earth Mother. This is distinctly different than the god of the Ogier, who is.
I was about to ask that, because traditionally in D&D you have nature gods, but they're not actually associated with druids, because druids aren't worshippers, they are protectors of nature, and nature itself is like, it's closer to the force than it is to the gods.
Yeah, so I think she is more of a kind of custodian of like just the natural world more generally, and like the force of it.
So she's like the most invested in keeping the balance and stability of the real world.
Exactly. She wants things to. Yeah, she doesn't want too much of civilization to spread out, but she also understands that it has its place, it has its balance.
Yeah.
And she wants things not to be in excess.
So she's like, so if there was a really advanced technology that was discovered and it could revolutionize the world and change it permanently, she'd be like, no, smite.
Yeah, she'd be like, that's not happening.
Yeah.
Be gone.
That's why there are no gnomes. They got killed for daring to dream too big.
Spoiler alert. Yeah. And then there is the god of kind of justice, civilization, and order, is Torm.
Elon Musk. Yeah, go on.
Yeah, he's Elon Musk, but he's Elon Musk, which is like just the deep fake Chinese version of him. But I posted an image. That is what he looks like.
Dang.
But
Justice is blind. Justice is fucking terrifying.
yeah, Justice is meant to. I don't know. I feel like there's something distinctly inhuman about him, largely because he is. It is like a cold, emotionless justice
So he's like
and order.
the incarnation of logic, of rationality, utilitarian
Mhm.
sort of
Ex-
idea.
exactly. And then after that, you have Aelor, who is known as the kind of the god of knowledge, learning, and teaching, revered by the elves in particular. Was at least in the time before the kind of the calamity and the dark ones meddling, was often found talking and kind of interacting with the Mashari elves, and so is often depicted as like an old elf.
A great
And then
teacher.
yeah, and then the final one, sorry, the final two is one that you probably know quite intimately, Timora, the god of
Yeah.
fate and change, typically depicted as like a dark-skinned woman with very piercing, like almost astrally blue eyes, kind of like the similar colors to like stars and
Yeah.
supernovas in the sky. And then finally, the kind of foil to Arius, Gephorus, who is the god of storms. He is like the turbulent wind. He is
Would he
probably
also
the
sort of have war in his domain as well?
yeah. I think at least some gods would see him as like, or at least not some gods, but some civilizations would definitely see him as a war god.
Right.
And he is a kind of he is a god of kind of anger and destruction.
This reminds me of I know you haven't read them, but they're in the Live Ship Traders series. There are
Mm,
two gods in like the world's sort of only religion, and
yeah.
there's El and Sar. And Sar is like the one that has like the Pope and the Vatican, and like everyone likes Sar. It's the life-giving god, and like, oh, we give our blessings and our praise to Sar. And then there's El, and people are like, we hate El. You never give like praise to El. Even people who like revere him, they never pray
Mhm.
to him because he doesn't listen to prayers. You only offer him curses. You're like, you like sort of great hell, smite this man for me, and he might grant that. But if you ask for like blessings from your field, he will kill you.
Yeah. Well, I imagine this is pretty much what Gephorus is like. He is a smite like a quite a spiteful, untamed deity of kind of destruction. But interestingly, I wouldn't say he is directly evil. It's more that it is his nature to
It's like
be
high passion.
disruptive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So he's like the sort of the rage necessary to break your bonds and your limits. Like
Yeah,
so like a strong rebellion against a corrupt leader would follow in his footsteps.
exactly.
And the patron of barbarians, of course.
Oh yeah, 100%. Stormharrow barbarians. I
Yeah.
mean, judging by the image alone, Stormharrow barbarians love this guy.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think those are probably at least the main 12 gods that exist in the world.
Hmm.
I mean, there are small minor deities and there are deities that can kind of challenge them. There are also definitely some evil deities that are bigger, but these are at least the pantheon that is typically worshipped or prayed to.
Yeah.
Um,
So if these sort of are the overview of the psyche, what
mm,
about demons and devils? Because we've talked about that
yes.
at length now. We sort of know that those are. It's not like D&D where they're separate creatures. They are
Yeah.
the same type, but they're sort of the devil and demon are like different orders of the same people.
Yeah, it's almost like the devils are so both are come from thoughts and specifically dark or evil thoughts.
Yeah.
But I guess the devils are ones that are evil thoughts wrapped up with some kind of like material uh, corruption. It's almost as though like you have a mortal being that has this kind of link to this dark thought.
Oh, I see. So a devil is like when a demon is able to get a proper vessel, a sentient mind that it can sort of pair with, it becomes a devil. because it becomes like greater thinking.
Yes. And then like a demon is just the thought itself.
Right.
However, that means that the darker the thought, the most heinous evil thought that you could have is it exists, and it is the most evil and heinous demon. Yeah,
That's really sinister as well, because like if we have an evil thought about something that is really cunning, like
mm.
the more cunning and more terrible we think it is, the more
Oh yeah,
cunning the devil is.
oh yeah,
Like it becomes stronger with the idea of it being stronger, which that is a really dangerous idea, or
yeah.
sort of prospect.
But I think that's it. I don't know if it has biblical links, but at least in my head, it seems to have kind of almost like a biblical view on demons, in the sense that um, they can become more powerful by merely thinking on these type of actions.
I think it's sort of
Um,
a reflection of the idea of of gods and their sort of idea of, well, faith in the god can strengthen
mm,
it, but also the idea that they represent. More of that
yes,
will also strengthen the god, and it's the same with devils.
and I think with the gods, and this is I think the biggest distinction between, well, if demons are just thoughts that are really heinous, then surely demons are just like gods, because gods are clusters of thought that have an order to them.
Yeah.
I think the difference is that it is that word of order, in unity. These thoughts, because they are just heinous momentary thoughts that are disconnected, are entirely solitary creatures, which would become demons.
Mm.
Whereas the gods, they have to have some kind of binding commonality to it.
Yeah. So demons sort of, they hate each other and themselves as much as anything else.
Yeah, they hate everything.
Yeah.
Demons are as
Is there
self-destructive.
a conceivable way they could like unite and work together?
Oh yeah, and I think it would large. It wouldn't be that they would work together, or kind of. Whereas with, I think devils could, because
They're
devils could
smart enough
affect.
to, yeah.
Yeah, because they have the human form, there is this understanding that they can work together, because their existence doesn't rely on them corrupting and tainting others or destroying others. Whereas
Mm.
when they're in this kind of state of demon, when they are demon, where they are kind of these just scattered thoughts, that are like, well, not scattered thoughts, but like very solitary thoughts that are intrinsically, or like extremes, they are kind of potentially searching to either amass more power, or to find a form that they can become or ascend to a devil.
Oh, I tell you, so I just had a brain fart, but that could be, you know how sort of lots of warlocks make their pacts with imps and small sort of things. I
Yeah,
imagine a pretty common price that would be cheap for a young warlock to pay is, after the terms of are up, your price is that you give me your body, or like I can, yeah, I get your body. It's like,
yeah,
well, a proper warlock will like, well, you only get it like in the second of my death.
yeah, or even, I mean, like you could have that would be one that was like a demon that wanted to become a devil, but it could even be like a warlock's familiar, for instance. Let's use
Yeah,
Zenobia and Mog. Mog is a devil, but he is only a devil because he was a demon, which was originally of like an evil thought, but
yeah,
not one so heinous that it's unthinkable by sane minds.
yeah.
Yeah,
So I suppose like there are some demons that, even though they're less evil, they have the same strength because they're so common.
yeah.
Like, like a demon of like really minor jealousy. Like everyone
Oh,
gets jealous,
yeah.
but it's not an especially strong thought.
Yeah, or maybe it's not the strength, but rather it's a prevalence to it.
Mm,
Because I think in that sense there would be just like imps would be the thought of just kind of just general jealousy, like
yeah,
minor jealousy, and that's what imps would be if they were able to get like some kind of humanoid, or uh, just any kind of physical form.
I suppose if a warlock did a summoning ritual, they could like, rather than being fully possessed, it might be
Mm.
in a sort of a ritual or a technique to be able to share, without them
Yeah,
being possessed, share their consciousness to allow a sort of part devildom
yeah.
to a demon.
And I think this actually has foundings, or at least has precedent in the way you've played the game so far. In the new campaign, I won't spoil the moment, but there is a spell cast where a vessel is found for a demon, and then it becomes a devil.
Mm.
And I think that maybe provides a little bit of context as to the distinction.
I mean, based on what you said alone, I can guess exactly who you're talking about and who the vessel is and who's cast it.
Yeah, well, you know because you've witnessed it, but
Yeah.
for the viewer that hasn't, I'm going to leave that till we get to the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's at least in my head the distinction between demons and devils.
I love it.
Do you have any other questions about anything else?
What we've not talked about is so we've looked at the reality, we've looked at the map, and then we zoomed out and we had a look at the close planes and then the outer planes and then like the realms of thought.
Yeah.
And now, as always, because I love Lovecraft, I want to talk about the realms beyond even that. The realm of abstract horror, of cosmic insanity, the far reaches of true thought into the abyssal voids.
Yeah. I think that would still be part of the kind of the realm of thought, or the astral plane, or the astral sea. But it is these demons would be these greater demons would be these like Lovecraftian horrors.
So they're the same essential being, but greater.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Like I guess, for instance, like Cthulhu, or a being even more insane than Cthulhu, would be like potentially one of the worst thoughts ever thought. Yeah.
So it's interesting because in the Cthulhu mythos, they're not quite that. How do I describe it? You've got, I think the best example is Yog-Sothoth. So Yog-Sothoth is like the sort of eldritch god of knowledge, which is how mortals perceive him to be. But in reality, he's more like knowledge itself, and every name that mortal races have for him is Yog-Sothoth, but it's one side of Yog-Sothoth, and he is like he's essentially like a non-Euclidean shape, and each surface is something that someone could see as a being, a separate being, but no one with a mortal mind can attribute the other forms of Yog-Sothoth into being the same being, if that makes sense. Like, only a true eldritch horror would be able to see the many forms of Yog-Sothoth as the same being.
I'm going to be honest with you. I don't know if I have anything like that, but it would make sense in a strange, dark, morbid way that there would be these kind of eldritch kind of foils to the gods, which would be that they think of these demons, these isolated thoughts that are like the worst thought that could ever exist, or like the worst murderous intent that has ever existed, or like stuff like that are kind of like you say, like a little bit like Yog-Sothoth. They have this kind of you need a crazed mind to put together that this is all connected.
Yeah, so it's like the truth sounds insane because it is insane.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's probably how it would exist in my world, or at least in the world of Tanner.
The only other thing I wanted to ask, now that we've gotten my satience for the appetite of cosmic horror out of the way, was how the gods died. So we had the gods who survived were inhabiting mortal forms at the time. Is that right?
Yeah. So I think an important.
I mean, is an even bigger parallel to the devils.
Yeah. I think it would be a situation where I will say this: it's not necessarily that the gods died, rather they were. Okay, there were
they're like the coalescence of an idea. So would they sort of break into the smaller ideas, and sort of lots of those little shards were absorbed by the other gods, which were close enough to to that idea. that they could
exactly.
take on some of those.
And the way that the Dark One kind of gained power in that sense and became a god is that he kind of like he gave up his physical form and had this strong idea and goal in mind, and that when he kind of destroyed the Mashari elves, many of the gods appeared and had physical forms at the time, and when it did it effectively put them in like a cosmic stasis, and those that didn't have ways out or didn't have mortals they were connected with or artifacts in the world, like let's use Heliod for example, because I think he's probably the one I fleshed out the most. Heliod had a son, and so he was able to kind of prevent himself from fully being in this stasis where he was effectively like a stunned prey that could be picked apart piecemeal by this new Dark One with a desire to expand his divine domain. Whereas there were definitely some gods that elements of their being was taken by the Dark One, and so effectively they died because all the thoughts that and the kind of associated thought to do with them had been stripped away from them, and they're kind of like dwindling away. So yeah.
So in terms of the Dark One, then, since the Dark One is a god of lies, he is sort of in essence a god of negativity.
Yeah,
I mean, he would have quite a few like demons of betrayal, demons of lies, demons of deception. Would those become could those become part of the Dark One, because those themselves are similar to the sort of small pieces of ideas that form the bigger god?
Yeah, I think they would, and I think this is almost where the kind of the demons overlap with the darker gods.
So the Dark One is the bridge between them.
Exactly. He would allow almost to kind of he would allow these thoughts a safe haven, and the most crazed thoughts are the kind of eldritch cosmic horror that is all part that are so crazed, so out there, so insane they can't form a god's deity or
Because
god's
they're
mind.
true. The craziest thoughts in the world are like they're all like 100% true.
Maybe
the mountains are aliens. They're alive. The mountains are alive. Ah, shut up. And the mountain just fucking opens its eyes here. I mean, he's not wrong. They are giants.
Yeah. I mean, you got me there. But no, I guess
why do the mountains cluster together? Well, I mean, that's just the giants meeting.
Maybe.
And then it's like the one lone mountain. That's the exiled giant there. That's the fucking reject.
If you think about it, a mountain range is just like a massive vagina, bro. It's got associations with like motherhood and birth and.
That was such a tangent. Jesus Christ. It's the womb of the dwarves.
You just gotta think of it like that, bro.
Jesus Christ, what's going on here? What is the male phallus equivalent of this metaphor? I don't want to go. Oh God.
Anyway, evil gods.
Yeah.
Is effectively they would have power because the less extreme, less crazed of these thoughts have a place they can go or to coalesce, and the evil gods can access them. So for instance, like let's say the god of murder, the most crazed murderous intents, those that go beyond like just, oh, I want to kill this guy over here because I really fucking hate him. It'll be like, I want to not just kill him, but I want to do all these horrible things to him. I want to do it in such a vicious way that it's insane. That would be crazed. Whereas just a simple thought would be still a demon, but it would be given a place where it could be accessed and almost like a safe haven among this astral sea.
So they're separated by intention, not act.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah, and I think that's how the evil gods exist. And so the Dark One, when he kind of comes in, basically flashbangs, stuns a bunch of these gods. Those that don't have these kind of contingencies where their memory is still kept strong, and so their thoughts are kept together, at least in the material plane. Now now is kind of like taken apart. I guess this is a really interesting thought, or at least it is to me. I hope it isn't mind-numbingly boring to everyone else. But in a sense, before the material plane existed and before anything else existed, there was just thought, and there was just the potential to think. And when they created the material,
This is where the argument started,
yeah,
because
yeah,
you brought this up, and I was like, yeah, but thought is a consequence
but
of
but
complex life.
well, this is the thing, and I guess there is now a shift. It's at first it was the potential for thought, and so they create the material plane with Livingstone, and then everything begins to be thought, and things begin to actually be experienced, and all this begins to spiral off. And so the gods that first created this thing and created the mortal races now draw energy from the mortal races, the material plane. The reason why the material plane is so important for so many gods is that it effectively emits thought back into the
feedback
astral
loop.
thing. Yeah, and it gives them more power. And so originally they created it as an experiment to see what would happen, but now they're almost reliant on it. And so this would explain why gods are so like invested as well.
I like that. However, I would like to counter yours to. There's an idea of I like this idea of the gods creating. Yeah. But even though I'm not big on like religion or anything like that, my favorite description of how the world is made is it was just there. Because if we know in the story that the gods made it, and we know who the gods are, like the world becomes less mysterious, less significant. Like it's just something that the gods made. Whereas if the world was there before the gods, what made the world?
Well,
and it's not a question that even the gods can answer.
Exactly. I think in that sense there would be naught but thought in Livingstone, and that was effectively before anything. There was thought in Livingstone, and the gods made the mortal races, and in the Livingstone, which wasn't created by the gods, existed dragons and giants, and then dwarves. And boom.
So that's like the material and immaterium together. Livingstone being the material, and thought being the immaterial.
Yeah. And we don't know what existed or what Livingstone may have been. Perhaps Livingstone and the world before it was the remnants of a world that was much like it was now, that basically imploded, or something happened, or one of the gods just decided to self-destruct, and by doing so destroyed all the previous other gods, and now they're in like a new god, a new planet. Like it is a mystery. And I think
it could be an event that is yet to come, like in Norse mythology. It's like a sort of a loop.
Yeah, and I will say this as well. One of the roles of Okator is that these, and has been, I guess, a theme, especially in Campaign 1, is that there is also a cyclical nature to life. And that souls often reincarnate and live multiple cycles. And so the role of kind of Okator as the god of the world of death and the custodian of these souls is also responsible in a way for protecting them until they put back in the material plane.
Now here's a question: if demons and devils seek out living mortal bodies, what does Okator protect the souls from, if not from those evil creatures? Like what hunts the soul?
He is the shepherd to the sheep. He's got to make sure that no wolves get in.
But who are the wolves?
Demons.
But
what if a demon gets into the batch of souls and then a body's born with a demon straight inside it?
What? How? Oh, as in like a demon latches onto the soul and gets reincarnated with it, like it hitches a ride.
Yeah, and then just consumes the soul upon conception.
So here's the thing. Now you're introducing something different. So being able to consume a soul, because if we've established that ideas cannot be destroyed, they can only change form. If a soul can be destroyed, That raises a whole new question.
The consumption would be more of a question of like it corrupts it entirely.
Oh, it like breaks it into its individual thoughts.
The thought is still there. It is just corrupted, tainted.
It turns a true like sentient mind into a non-sentient bunch of lucid thoughts.
Yes, or crazed thoughts, which could lead to certain beings existing that deliberately want the creation of this cosmic horror.
I'm so glad you've talked about that, Chris, because I wanted to talk about my prep for campaign 3.
Oh no!
And there's a creature I've just written down called a Necropolian horror.
Okay.
So in Ironos, some readers might know where I got my inspiration for this from. But in Ironos, in Scales Rest, there's a sort of a, not quite a cult. They like to call themselves the Conspiracy, but it's a cult. It's a cult.
Yeah.
And it's a horror, and one of its abilities. So it's got like true horror. You see it, and you go and like you are feared. True monstrosity, like heals as much as you damage it. Sapience predator, like it will eat your intelligence to gain more stats itself. But its last ability is empathic pulse, where it hits you, it does no damage, it has no negative effect. The only thing it does is allow it and you to feel each other's emotions, and that's the real horror. Because in that last moment, you realize how similar you are on like a sort of sentient level.
Yeah. I like that, and I will say this. This is not me blowing smoke up Nick's ass, but genuinely, a strength of your DMing style that I really love as a player is just the sheer horror you can create. And I think we were playing Call of Cthulhu, and I was terrified to walk home in the dark.
That was so good, man. I really want to play Call of Cthulhu again one day.
Yeah, and I think that just applying like creatures like that can create a real sense of horror, and it's something I look forward to.
Well, here's the thing, Chris, is that your horror and my horror is different, but it's not like different in quality. It's our style. Like your horror is very, I think your horror is, it's a little bit to do with the pacing, because your horror comes on quicker. It's more sudden, which is like, there's a shock to it that mine doesn't have. Like yours will interrupt us, and it like your horror has this all sounds very pretentious, but your horror has fangs, whereas mine's more like a drowning.
Yes, yeah, I feel like, especially with because I quite like body horror. I think that's a big thing that I enjoy.
You and me both. We both fucking love body horror.
And so I kind of like the in a movie shot, like the flash of lightning reveals the horrifying thing. Whereas I imagine with you, it's more like you start with like the peripheral senses that slowly...
I never want to see the full thing. Like that would ruin it. But then, like I really like your monsters. Like, oh my god, the first boss that we had, the way you described the amalgamate horror of the demon absorbing things into its body, and like, oh my god, like I haven't even asked about that. Like, is that like a devil that went wrong, like something that possessed something and then couldn't stop?
So that would have been like a demon of like excess. Sorry, it would be a devil, but the demon before it would have been like excess gluttony.
So something that eats and eats and eats and is never full.
Because like even its breath weapon was just basically it regurgitating mass that it had consumed, and it would get gradually longer by consuming things, and then like different limbs from whatever it consumed would like just add to its length and girth, and just it was
that like the sort of the idea that like it's a danger, you don't want to deal with it, don't want to approach it, leave well enough alone. But at that same time, you know for certain that if you do leave it, it's only going to get worse. Like you will have to face it. It's the eventuality of it.
Oh yeah.
And like Yeah. The longer you leave it, the stronger it becomes.
I think we both can kind of, I don't know, both agree with this, right? Like Skinner from The Wandering Inn
Oh my god, so good.
is horrifying, but he's like the type
I
of
think
monster.
it's the fact that there's no build up. Like it's a lot
Oh
more
yeah,
similar to yours. Like it's a la 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 la. It's all funny. It's all great, and then
yeah.
bam.
Yeah, it's the complete coin flip. It's like, yes, I've lulled you into a sense of security.
Ah, yes, we're looting, having some treasure. It's a great time, and then Skinner, Skinner, chicken dinner. Ah!
Oh my god, it is just. I mean, most people who are listening to this, that being the people in the D&D group, have listened to The Wandering Inn. But if you by chance haven't, and you're coming across this, because the YouTube algorithm has plopped you here, read The Wandering Inn. Listen to it.
I would highly recommend reading it,
Mm.
purely because what you don't get in the audio is how the text is written. Not just like, like, oh, I write this in a certain prose. Like the use of italics and bold and the size and especially the color of text
Ooh,
makes such a huge difference in the written version. Like there are subtle hints given away in the color of the text.
I did not
Like
know
I'm
there was
not joking.
different color.
Like there's these little details in like the way the text is visualized that is so amazing compared to how you can only like hear it in the audio.
Yeah.
I think the best way, without any spoilers, because like to mention any of them would be like massive spoilers.
Mm.
I think the least egregious one is in the way that spells that omit information are shown, because in the written version, it's like it's either bolded out like it's been redacted like on a file, or it's sort of an underscore. It's the line where a word should be. And you get these long paragraphs that are nothing but lines. And it's like, what the fuck has been placed here that I cannot see? And you can see how much is missing.
That is.
I'd highly recommend reading the written version, is what I'm saying.
Well, I have a plan. I wanna print them
You're
out.
going to go back and read it from the start, aren't you? After you finish listening to it.
Oh yeah. I'm gonna try and. I don't know how much it's gonna cost me to print it, but I will print it all.
You can buy it on Kindle, I think.
Yeah, but it just doesn't feel the same. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. As soon as it gets on like proper printed, like I am,
Oh, yeah.
I am buying the fuck out of that.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, dear listener, that is all for today's episode.
Yeah. We thank you, Seb, for listening. Our one and only viewer.
Yeah, and I'm sure he'll post his feedback in the comments.
Yeah. And you can't tell us we're wrong this time because we haven't talked about any of this in campaign. So shove it up your ass.
Yeah. Fuck you, Seb. Have a good night. Take care.
Good night.